camp of there's no way somebody can build as much muscle on a plant-based diet. And now I think I've come back to you can, it just requires a little bit more planning. And I don't want to say always, but it's very difficult to do without an isolated source of protein. So unless you're going to supplement with an isolated plant source of protein, it's very difficult to get enough without going over on total calories, because you can figure that, especially like take somebody who may be calorically restricted, trying to get enough protein from whole intact plant sources. So you've got a few different things working against you. One, the sources of protein you're consuming also have carbohydrate and or fat. Two, it's a less bioavailable form of protein. And three, it's a lower quality of protein in terms of it has typically less leucine, less branching amino acids, and less essential amino acids.
You answered the question that I almost interrupted you to ask, which was, does it boil down to the leucine content? And it sounds like that is one of the components, and that a lot of the vegan and vegetarian sources of excellent protein, that excellent protein vegetarian or vegan source is co-packaged with calories from carbohydrates and or fat that make it hard to stay under the caloric threshold. Whereas a steak is, I'm not, and obviously people might want to avoid that for ethical reasons,
sure,
but that's a different matter entirely. But a steak or a piece of chicken or an egg is, well, an egg, has a yolk, which is, there's fat there, but is almost a pure protein fat source. There's no carbohydrate along for the ride.
Right. So I think what I would say is that, you can do it. It takes a little more planning. And you're almost always, if you're a vegan, especially, you're going to be better off like supplementing with some isolated form of protein, or vegan form of protein. Now, this is where it gets into, people say, well, what about the limiting amino acids and those sorts of things? It's a consideration. Some of the better forms of vegan protein in terms of amino acid content are like soy. Now, I hear everybody screaming online about their testosterone levels. In terms of actual outcomes and looking at testosterone, there was a recent meta-analysis looking at soy, and I think if it's your only source of protein, then maybe the dosage is high enough to cause some weird effects. But if you're just using it like once or twice a day, it doesn't seem to have an effect on testosterone or estrogen. So that can be a decent source of protein because it is a complete protein source. It does have a PDCAAS of 1, which PDCAAS is basically a measure of protein quality based on, does it provide enough of all the amino acids so that none are limiting. And so soy is one of the only vegan sources that does that. Interestingly, potato protein isolate actually has a similar essential amino acid content to whey. So isolated potato protein, it's just really hard to find. I've been trying to source it.
But vegans take note, vegetarians take note or vegans rather, because whey is vegetarian. And whey is a very high quality protein source.
Very high quality protein source. And actually, they're actually creating whey now out of, I think it's, I may mischaracterize this, but I believe they're able to produce it now out of like yeast or something like that.
Amazing.
That, so for vegans, now this is a great option because you can have whey that's not animal based that is going to be every bit as good as an animal based whey. So I think that's great. Getting to the leucine, let me go back, sorry. So another reason that using an isolated protein can be helpful is because it's more bioavailable as well when it's been isolated out. When it's the protein bound up in the actual plant material, it tends to be less bioavailable. Now, cooking can help increase the bioavailability because it breaks some of those bonds and whatnot, but it still seems to be lower. And it's really interesting. There was a recent study where they did a corn, wheat, and pea blend of protein versus whey. And basically the outcome was 30 grams of each stimulated protein synthesis to a similar degree. But the plasma amino acids in the plant-based protein still did not get as high as with whey. Now, it may be that's just, it doesn't matter because once you get to a certain level, you get all the benefits. So, but I still found it interesting nonetheless that they didn't quite get as high. The other thing to consider with the vegan sources of protein is the leucine content. So one of the studies we did was we looked at wheat, soy, egg, and whey. Isonitrogenous, meaning we equated protein between the groups. Isocaloric, we equated calories. And we looked at muscle protein synthesis. And I think the meals were 15% of total energy from protein. So like your food guide pyramid level of protein. And we saw that in the wheat and soy group, they did not increase muscle protein synthesis, but the egg and whey group increased muscle protein synthesis. Now, what's really interesting is we went back and we took wheat and added free leucine to it to match the leucine content of whey, and the protein synthetic response was identical. So again, I don't like to simplify things too much, but leucine appears to really be driving this ship. And I'll never forget, Lehman called me into his office one day, and he would always do these like thought experiments of, he liked to think about why something occurs the way it does.
Dangerous territory.
Yeah. So he would say, one day, I'll never forget, he's like, Lane, why do you think the body evolved to just sense leucine for muscle protein synthesis? And of course, I'm like, I don't know, man. I just work here. Like, I'm just trying to get my PhD. And he said, well, think about it. You would want something that really wasn't extensively metabolized by the gut and liver, because you would want it to show up in the blood in values that reflect what you just ate. Makes sense. And you would want it to have passive diffusion across the muscle cell, because you'd want it to be concentration dependent, which it is. So
get into the tissues and cells that need it most.
Right. So, not having active transport, but rather passive transport. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting the way he broke that down. So few different options for the vegan folks out there. You can use an isolated source of protein. And again, like, there's going to be good options coming, because this plant-based whey is going to be a great option for folks. You can add free leucine to it, to whatever your source of protein is.
Just buy supplemented leucine powder. Leucine.
Now, it tastes horrible.
Yeah, I think I've heard that. Maybe I've even tried it.
It's completely nonpolar, does not dissolve in anything.
Can it be put into capsules?
Gross. It can be put into capsules, yeah. So you could take a capsule, like, for example, if you're eating your normal meal, you could just take a capsule of like 1 gram of leucine. It's probably going to bump you up enough that you're going to be good to go. And then there's options like blends, especially with corn. Corn is actually very high in leucine as a percentage of its protein. Now you got to remember, like, you go eat corn on a cob and you're getting like 2 grams of total protein, so it's not that much leucine. But if you isolate out the protein, put it into a powder, well, now, when you're getting like 80, 90% of the weight is now protein, corn is actually about 12% leucine in terms of the protein. So a great source of leucine. It is like almost frank deficient in some other amino acids, but you can blend it with a few other sources of protein. Like, you could blend it with a soy, a pea, and you can create these complementary blends that would actually have quite a bit of leucine, but also some of the other essential amino acids. So there are options out there for plant-based folks. And I mean, we have seen people who are plant-based, build impressive amounts of muscle. There's quite a few bodybuilders that are plant-based.
And a lot of the endurance athletes like it. And even though when we talk about muscle, we think about muscle building often, performance in endurance sports, and also just performance for the typical person who's doing some cardiovascular training, hopefully some resistance training also, and just living life. I mean, many more people now, it seems, are vegan, or at least avoiding meat, in particular red meat. I'm not one of those people. Yep. I limit the amount, and I certainly focus on the quality of what I eat, but I do eat red meat, which brings me to a question about, just generally in terms of food choice. Can we come up with a relatively short summary of the following? Tell me if this is correct or not, that most of us should be focused on, for sake of health span and lifespan, should be focused on ingesting minimally non-processed and minimally processed foods, maybe even cooking our own food. I realize that's heresy now, but ideally we would do some of that, and really trying to avoid foods that are highly processed and have lots of sugar. And I'm using this as a segue to get into a question that I really want your answer to. I've been dying to ask you this, which is, if sugar intake is not actually going up as much as people think it is, why are people getting so much fatter? Right. So what do you think about just a general statement that we should try and eat foods that are low to no, minimally to not processed for about 80% of our foods? Is that a reasonable number?
It's hard to actually get completely unprocessed food because almost everything goes through some form of processing.
Right. So I'm thinking like
whole
anything
food,
that wouldn't survive long on without
shelf.
refrigeration. Yeah, on a shelf, like an apple or a banana or something.
Yeah.
Oatmeal, like ground oats, to me, as long as there isn't a bunch of other stuff in there, would be minimally processed.
Yeah.
A steak is not really processed, although it's cut off the animal, et cetera. So there's a few steps in there, but that's what I mean.
Yeah. And I think everybody kind of gets the gist. I'm probably a little bit pedantic when it comes to this stuff.
No, this is good. Actually, one of the things I appreciate about you is something that I get teased a lot by people close to me, which is the caveats and the insistence on precision is really important because especially with online communications these days, it's like a runaway train. People will
it's too easy to misinterpret what you're saying.
Very easy to misinterpret. And the misinterpretations are often used to leverage whole new ideas about what is and isn't true, mostly about what is true. So I really appreciate the nuance. And this is what a long form podcast really allows us to do is catch every curve.
Yeah. So I would 100% agree with what you said, that if you were going to make a broad stroke, that trying to focus on minimally processed foods is very important. The one caveat I would say is I think it's important to understand why, because otherwise people can make this weird association that like if I eat any minimally or any processed food, it's going to kill me, or like every time I eat it, it's like I'm smoking a cigarette and my health, my longevity is declining. Based on the studies we have, it's mostly about the energy. That processed food just gets people to spontaneously eat more. And Kevin Hull showed this in his study that was he designed some of the most elegant studies in nutrition.
He's great.
And they basically took people from a minimally processed food diet and then gave them access to ultra processed foods, very few instructions, just eat till you feel satisfied. And they spontaneously increased their calorie intake by 500 calories a day. I mean, that's massive. So and we haven't quite figured it out. People say, well, it's sugar. It doesn't appear to be sugar in terms of just in isolation. Well, it's fats. It doesn't appear to be fats in isolation. Well, it's the combination of sugar and fat. Partly, it's the combination of sugar, fat, and salt. Partly, but there's some kind of like overall magic to the texture and the mouthfeel and just the overall palatability of stuff, which is always why I say there's like right and wrong ways to do these different diets. Like, for example, like there's a right way to do plant-based, and then there's, like what's in some of these documentaries where they're eating like plant-based mac and cheese, and again, I love a good mac and cheese, but like that should not be pitched as a healthy diet just because it's plant-based, right? Because you're eating a highly processed food that's very palatable and easy to overeat. Same thing for keto. You've now got like keto ice creams and you've got, keto cookies and all these sorts of things. And I'm like, and if you look at them, they actually have more calories than the normal stuff. And I'm like, this is completely missing the point here. Like you're actually just taking yourself, like the whole point of those diets is the reason you tend to lose weight is originally like good luck, 10 years ago doing a keto diet, eating processed food, right? Like you just couldn't do it really. Mm-hmm. Now you can. But the problem is it's not going to work because you're going to be still consuming too many calories, because even though it's keto, what are they doing? Well, they're trying to make it more palatable. They're trying to make it better mouthfeel, which I guess if you're being keto for the sake of being keto, great. But if you have hopes of body composition modification, it's going to, really negatively impact. So yes, I think minimizing the amount of processed food you consume can be important. Now, that being said, it depends on the individual and their goals. If your goal is to, for example, build muscle or maintain a high body weight for a sport, for example, like an NFL offensive lineman or something of that nature, or if you're, I worked with an NBA team. They were kind of, I can't disclose anything, but they were looking at drafting a certain player. Like for them, processed foods may actually be a tool.
Or teenagers.
Right.
We all want young people to eat more healthfully, I think, develop great habits, but some of them, their caloric needs are so high that if they were eating what I eat, they're going to dissolve into, they're just waste away.
So I describe this again with a financial example. It's like a budget, right? So if I make $1 million a year, for example, is it okay for me to buy like a $100,000 sports car? Let's assume that loans don't exist, right? Is it okay for me to buy a $100,000 $1,000 sports car if I still am able to pay my mortgage and pay my utilities and like take care of my responsibilities, the things I should do? Is it okay if I do that, if it like makes me feel good and it's fun?
By me.
Yeah, it's fine, right? Like it fits in your budget. If I make, 50 grand a year, should I be going out and, buying a sports car? Probably not, because I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage and all these other responsibilities. So your protein, your fiber, your micronutrients, these are your responsibilities. But those become much easier to hit when you have higher calories, right? So if you're eating 4,000 calories a day for whatever goal you have, you're probably going to have some left over, and like good luck eating 4,000 calories from minimally processed foods. Quite frankly, you'll be miserable because you're going to have such gut fill that you're going to feel like you can't even move. And so again, now it becomes, okay, well, is there something inherent to that food processing? Is there something, that we can pick out that we know, okay, well, this is going to be a negative effect on health, even like body composition stuff aside? And I would say there's not really great evidence of that so far. And a great example of that is sugar. I mean, I actually just wrote a really long article on my website about why I think sugar was not the root cause of the obesity epidemic. And you kind of mentioned like sugar intake in the last 20 years has actually gone down a little bit.
Alcohol intake.